So this is my presentation, IndexedDB, and going offline. Why do I do this to myself? Feel free to interrupt me. Don't feel like you have to mute. I think I probably will barely hit 15 minutes if I'm lucky. IndexedDB is something that I actually was inspired to do after Joe's last in-person web API discussion. It brought me back to a day when I was looking into this. So I don't know it super well, but I also wanted to challenge myself with something I'm not familiar with. I've never presented before, so quick about me. I'm a front-end developer at American Eagle, and I like all things front-end development related. And I play bass, and I'm a whiskey drinker.
And so, thank you for presenting.
I'm happy to. So we're going to talk about what IndexedDB is, and if you were to go to the MDN docs, essentially it's what they call it is a low-level API for client-side storage of significant amounts of structured data, including files and blobs. This API uses indexes to enable high-performance searches of this data. I think just to sum up, it's basically local storage on steroids. So basically at a high level, what it is it's a database that's actually in the browser. It's a successor to web storage. It basically allows you to create tables inside of the browser. You can create multiple databases, multiple tables in there, as many rows as you want. It's based on key value, and we'll take a look at. We'll dive in a little bit. It's JavaScript based. It's supported in all major browsers, and it supports transactions, so you can manipulate it. So we'll actually see it, but just so you can see it ahead of time, this is kind of what it will look like. So if you go into Chrome DevTools, if you were to look at what an IndexedDB would look like, this is what you would see. So I guess the whole thing is, why would you even want something like this to begin with? Because normally, if you're using cookies, you just need something simple, and if you have a database, then you're probably pulling that from an actual database. You don't want to store that locally. And the whole point really is for offline apps. It's the entire reason it really exists. There's a secondary bonus in that you get performance, because basically what happens is you're going to call an API like normal. You're going to store all of that data in IndexedDB behind the scenes. Next time that user hits your page, they're going to get the local version, so it's going to load instantly. And it also will be less hits on your server, but I don't think that this is a solution for that problem at all. I am flying through this, guys.
Remember to breathe.
Yeah. So just kind of like a visual process. So say you came onto the NFL site. They call it an API that just brings in a list of games. What's going to happen? That user hits first time, it's going to just call an API, bring it down. Behind the scenes, it's storing that into the browser IndexedDB. Next time they come to the site, if nothing's changed, they're just going to get that data straight from their browser instead of getting it from the API. And then if they visit the site again and it's changed, there will be an update, and then the API will be called to insert the items it needs to. So I think that this thing is awesome, at least the concept behind it, but you don't really hear about it too much, and I've never seen anybody implement it really. And I think that there's a few reasons for that. Basically, it can get pretty complicated, and it's pretty tough to make a business case most of the time for an offline app. I don't think that if you tell somebody you're going to do work for that it's going to take another 60 hours, but their site's going to be a little bit faster and offline capable, they'll probably laugh you out of the room. It is something, it's JavaScript based, but you do have to learn new syntax, and it can get a little bit more involved because of that. With offline apps in general, you have to think about data storage, and do you really want to download all of this information onto someone's device? Are they going to want you to do that? But the biggest problem by far is that it can be very dangerous because you risk displaying stale data to people. If something messes up and you don't update the version number of your database, you're not going to get the API call if another item got added. So I think that there's a lot of probably concern to even use it with that in mind. So I do have an example Can you guys see this okay?
Yep.
Cool. So I did not write this, but I did go through and comment it. It's a pretty good basic example of what it does. So when you start up with IndexedDB, it is supported in all the browsers, but you do have to write in all of these checks basically for it. So really, everything you're doing here is just making sure that the browser's supporting it to begin with. And then as far as browser support goes, it's pretty much across the board now. When I was dabbling in this a while ago, it was a lot more challenging because it was just, yeah, the support was not so great. So basic array. So here what we're doing is we're opening the database. You name it whatever you want, and you give it a version number. So I kept talking about that, and this is essentially what's the version of the database. So as soon as a new item gets added or something removed, you have to update this number. This is, if it doesn't load, you get an error. And success, it'll run this little table function later on. This is going to run if the database doesn't exist. So if they come the first time and they see that one doesn't exist, it's going to run this. It's also going to run this if the database gets updated. So you have what's called like an object store, and this is the table itself. So in this case, we're creating a table called employee, and we're setting the key to the ID, and then it's running through and just adding those to the database. So if I come into Chrome and I go into application, I can see that new database employee, and I can see that the 3 employees are actually here in the browser. As far as like loading the data, you do what's called a transaction. You grab it from the object store, you call which one you want, and then it does this open cursor, which basically is what IndexedDB uses to kind of run through the table and grab everything. And so nothing really crazy here. This is a pretty basic example. You'll just need this cursor continue to make sure that it'll actually loop through. And the same thing when you add somebody, it'll go through and you pick exactly what you're going to write to. And you also have to define if you're going to, by default, it's going to be read-only. You do have to declare that you're doing like a read-write if you're going to add or delete. I do see a couple questions. Yeah, so it is. I mean, it is pretty handy. I mean, I still love the idea. I still love the idea of like having offline capable apps. I think it's something that I'd love to see things move towards. I think Google really pushes for it because they own the web world, so it's in their best interest to bring in apps into the web world so you can get more Google Analytics and all of that. Normally I get tinfoil hat about that, but as a front-end developer, it would mean more work for me, so I'm not going to really say anything there. Yes, you can have multiple tables, and yes, you can have multiple index fields. I don't know if it raises exceptions on errors. So I'm just going to go through and just show the example real quick here. And if we come in and refresh, you can see it adds in here, and just like local storage would act if you refresh the page. You can see everything is still in here. So this is a really basic example, and I know it does not look like this is all that crazy, but it can get really involved once you start really adding, a lot of data, a lot of complex data when you're worried about like, if your data is going to be stale. So back to my recap. So is this good for you? Well, it's definitely crucial if your site has to be offline capable. So you have to use this in that case. Does your site have serve areas with poor connection? It's probably good for you. It's also a good case. are you looking for the best possible performance? I don't know if it's really worth the investment just to improve the speed of your site. And if you're a masochist, then yes, this is definitely something, because you'll start to lose your mind after a while. And I have attached resources, so I'll upload the slide. And that is my presentation. Wow, it was fast. Are there any questions in here?
Hey, Stu, I'm curious if when you were researching this or looking at this, if you happened upon web SQL.
I saw it mentioned, but I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. So I think web SQL predates IndexedDB. And the way you would do queries is very much like a SQL query. I'm assuming that queries in the context of IndexedDB are just get the JSON object that represents the record, and then just parse through it like you would any other JSON object. Is that?
Yeah, it's very similar to calling an API like you normally would in JavaScript. And so yeah, everything's going to be done just straight like this. So this is just that cursor running through and just rendering the data from the items.
So looking at your code here, the object store variable, DB transaction employee object store employee, is that kind of representative of the entire table, or should I not even be calling this a table?
Yeah, that is actually the name of the table, the employee. Okay,
so once you've got that, it's an array of objects that could kind of be treated like each one's a record and each field is like a column.
Yeah, essentially. Basically what they do here is you just have the key value. Now you can have multiple keys in this case, and the value is just stored like a giant object of data. So I
have like a million questions, but like when you create the table, do you define types at all? Do you say age is going to be an integer, or is every value is just a JSON object and it can be whatever it wants?
Yeah, I mean, it's in this case when you're adding it here, you're not really defining anything as far as I know, like you would in that case. It is really just like a value.
Gotcha. All right, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something interesting to check out. There's probably a lot more to it than I could even begin to cover.
Looks like this would be real cool for a prototype. Especially if you didn't have any back-end data sources or something, you could hodge things together and say, all right, is this kind of what you want, without actually having to go through all the effort of getting the back-end data stores.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I wanted to do when I first wanted to present was actually take a lot of that web API stuff that Joe showed at the last one and kind of make like a notebook app that also uses IndexedDB and service workers to allow you to have like an offline app. So I started that up, but I don't know if that'd probably take a lot longer to dive into. It probably would be good for a lightning talk.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Stu.
Thank you, Stu.